In 2018, you wouldn't think it's too much to ask that women be paid the same amount as men for doing the same job. Apparently, though, it is. And from Hollywood film sets to workplaces here in Australia, the battle about the worth of the sexes rages on. But there is one country in the world with a solution. Iceland has made it law that companies pay up. Women and men in like-for-like roles get equal money or their bosses cop a fine. Everyone seems pretty happy there, so why couldn't it work here? Barbara Johnson is a talented chef, and she knows it. Cooking is her passion, and the long, unforgiving hours she spends in the kitchen are almost worth it. Almost.
I have a friend who's a much older chef, and he says, Barb, listen, this is a fact. You're a woman. You are going to be paid less. Suck it up. At that moment, I realised he's right. He's absolutely right.
He may sound like a misogynist, but Barbara's mate is right if you look at the statistics.
The gender pay gap has hovered between 15 and 20% for the last 20-odd years. We need to address it, that is absolutely for sure.
In many of the firms, that doesn't go down very well.
But this academic says while there may be a pay gap, it has nothing to do with the battle of the sexes.
It's too simple, the idea. It's like men and women make different amounts of money. Well, sorry, the problem isn't a problem of sex discrimination.
But here in Iceland, they think otherwise.
Equality pays off.
And they're doing something about it.
My argument is always this is first and foremost an obvious human rights issue, but if that isn't enough for you, it also happens to pay off quite nicely.
Yeah, so it's not just a human right, it makes economic sense.
Yeah.
Working 9 to 5.
In Australia, there is clearly a problem. Our full-time gender pay gap stands at 15.3% in favour of blokes. And full-time working women take home, on average, $26,000 less per year than men.
Part of the reason for that is that we see far more men in senior leadership roles. Just over 16% of CEOs in Australia today are women.
They really are quite appalling statistics, aren't they?
There is nothing right about that.
Libby Lyons is the director of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency, a government group trying to reduce the pay gap.
Me being paid differently to a man for doing the same job, it's actually, we're not allowed to do that under the law.
But it happens all the time.
Sadly, it does. That's down to the fact of discrimination.
The fight for equal pay has galvanised much of the world.
Is an unbelievably bad idea.
But according to controversial Canadian sociologist and psychologist Jordan Peterson, it's a fight not worth having.
In my estimation, not only is it not reasonable, it's absolutely deadly. I think there's nothing that we could possibly do that's more ill-advised.
Well, why is it deadly? I mean, deadly is a very strong word.
It's been tried. It was tried throughout the 20th century to enforce equity outcomes, all through the communist bloc. That was the fundamental idea, to enforce equity outcomes. It didn't work well. It worked very badly.
Jordan Peterson believes a true pay parity between men and women across job sectors is impossible because of their natural differences, their biology. Women are more agreeable and men are better negotiators.
It's not like I'm happy about this, by the way. You know what I mean? It's not like I was hoping this would be the case and like I went and had a little ideology party about it. No one's happy about the fact that these differences between men and women happen to be intractable and that they produce often negative economic consequences.
Do you think that people's differences should be valued? Let's have a look at what you produce. Let's have a look at your outcomes and base it on that as opposed to your ability to negotiate at the contract stage.
Oh, well, you know, an intelligent company is going to do everything they can to evaluate their people on competence and reward them accordingly, right? I mean,
as opposed to whether they're agreeable or assertive?
Or extroverted or attractive. If you're extroverted and attractive, you're going to make more money. But that doesn't mean you're going to be better at what you do. It means there's a halo effect around you because you're attractive. People will value what you do more.
You sit back and you watch your male counterparts and you think, he's just said something I would never say. And then you think, why wouldn't I say it? Because I might be seen as a pushy woman? Exactly, that's what it is.
In the cooking business for 34 years, Barbara Johnson says even at the job offer stage, way before any negotiations take place, she's been shortchanged. In one instance, by $15,000 in favour of a man.
If you put our qualifications side by side, our experience, I was clearly the more experienced chef, and he was offered $15,000 more than me. And this is when I thought, we have a problem here.
And you believe it? The only reason you're being offered less
Absolutely.
is because you're a woman.
Why else would I be offered less?
How can that happen?
Sadly, that's a story I hear over and over and over again. It's appalling.
In Australia, the worst offenders are male-dominated industries like finance and real estate, where the gender pay gap is over 30% in favour of men.
I think as women, sometimes we're afraid to ask, we're afraid to be vocal, we're taught not to be.
It's also become the latest Hollywood movement.
There are a set of cultural ideals that persist.
We are an economic force for the industry.
It's that one paycheck in particular that's getting a lot of attention.
Last year, actress Michelle Williams was paid less than $1,000 to reshoot scenes for her movie All the Money in the World. Her male co-star, Mark Wahlberg, was paid $1.5 million.
And it's actually revealed pay discrimination as well as pay gap.
Across the Atlantic, the BBC has been accused of underpaying its female staff and contracting them without sick pay or maternity leave.
Tesco is one of the country's largest employers.
While supermarket chain Tesco is facing a $4 billion equal pay claim from up to 200,000 of its female employees.
Everyone should be paid what they're worth. And if I know my worth, I need to be paid accordingly. Doesn't matter if it's a man, doesn't matter if it's a woman. If someone's doing that job, they need to be paid correctly.
You have to travel a long way to find true gender pay equality. In fact, to the top of the world. It's here, remote, tiny Iceland, that's leading the rest of the planet in closing the pay gap between men and women. They've been talking about it for years and trialling it too, but last year they made it mandatory. It's now illegal for large companies to pay women less than men for the same work. An island made up of volcanoes, glaciers, and a population of just 350,000, Iceland has perhaps surprisingly long been at the forefront of the fight for gender equality. Last year, they elected their second female Prime Minister, but ironically, it took a man to take the legislative steps towards closing the pay gap.
I looked at it and said, well, this will probably never happen unless we make it mandatory.
It is interesting that it's taken a man to push this through.
Well, I would say I was just at the right spot at the right time.
Thorsten Viglanson is Iceland's former Minister of Social Affairs and Equality. A father of 3 daughters, he proposed an equal pay law in 2016 that would make it illegal for men and women not to be paid equally in like-for-like roles. He says there's an overwhelming benefit to all the Icelandic people in keeping women in the workforce. What are some of the dire predictions that some companies have made about if you do equal the pay between the genders? What's going to happen to them?
Of course, the typical argument is it's too expensive. And of course, when you're closing a gender pay gap, I mean, the real expense is not the implementation process of the standard itself, but actually raising wages for women. And my argument was that, well, if that's your expense, it shouldn't be borne by women, it should be borne by companies.
If there's one company that's living proof of an economic benefit to closing the pay gap, it's Reykjavik Energy. In 2011, the business was close to bankruptcy when CEO Bjarni Bjarnason took over and used the crisis as an opportunity for overhaul. What do you make of those arguments against it that say it may be fair and equal, but it doesn't make economic sense for our company?
There is no cost. It's a basic misunderstanding. We should not value human rights in money. If it is a basic right for women to have an equal pay as men, it should be so. You should not count it in dollars or kronas or whatever.
Today, the company is in good financial shape. Morale is higher than it's ever been, and the gender pay gap currently stands at 0.29% in favour of women.
Has there been positive discrimination to find a gender equality within your company?
No, we have never had to make a choice and take a woman which is less qualified than the man. It has not happened.
Maybe they work fewer
No
hours,
surprises, Canadian sociologist Dr. Jordan Peterson isn't convinced of Iceland's equal pay law.
It's like, you can't say that just because there's a difference between men and women on axis A, that the reason there's a difference is because they're men and women. You can't do that. It's elementary social science. You'd fail your first year psychology project if you set up an experiment like that.
Well, you know, perhaps those in power in Iceland will fail that course because they say that there is an unconscious bias, that there is an unconscious bias towards paying men more.
The unconscious bias literature is absolutely dreadful.
Well, the approach in Iceland seems to be, yes, there are myriad problems, but we're going to find a way to solve them.
Yeah, no, you're not. It's too complicated.
How long do you give them?
Until the project fails. I would say that'll probably take 15 years. It'll produce walloping economic costs. Because it's not possible to solve a multivariate problem like that. It's technically impossible.
The gender pay gap is most obvious when comparing sectors of the workforce. Compare low-paying female-dominated industries like childcare and teaching with high-flying male-dominated corporate jobs like finance and IT, and the divide seems insurmountable. Not so in Iceland, which plans to tackle and overcome that gaping difference too. Jordan Peterson, who claims professionally women are generally more interested in people and men in things, says closing the pay gap is too hard to even try. Why is an interest in people valued as highly as an interest in things? And why is agreeability not valued as well as assertiveness?
Well, it's a good question. It also depends on what you mean by valued, right? You mean the economic price that's put on it.
Absolutely, in terms of salaries.
Yeah, well, the thing about working with people, it's not easily scalable, right? Whereas working with things, man, that's scalable, right? I mean, if you write a computer program, you write a piece of software, like 1 billion people can use it. That's scalable. You're not going to have 1 billion human interactions in a day. So that's a big part of the problem.
What is your view, the one held by Dr. Peterson, that it's too complicated and the economic consequences are too dire to tackle this?
Why would you not tackle a problem because it's too complicated? I think that's a nonsense. Just because an issue is complicated does not mean that we sit back and accept it as the status quo.
All eyes are now firmly on Iceland as time will tell whether the tiny remote country has the big solution the world has been looking for.
The problem is obviously there, and if you want to do something about it, well, do something about it.
Thorsten Viglanson is quietly confident and has a message for the Australians he believes hold the key to positive change here.
This isn't a threat to men, it's just a more fair, balanced society. But men should be getting active or involved in the fight. I mean, this isn't something that is pointed against us. I mean, we are also, we are fathers to daughters, we are husbands, we have sisters. I mean, we should be taking our part in this and saying, well, this is something we want to fix with women.